For a company worth $3 trillion, Microsoft is surprisingly bad at making great products. I have obsessed over Microsoft for the past few months to understand their confusing product strategy, and I believe I have found that they have one fatal flaw that causes them to release half-baked products again and again. But interestingly, this flaw is also closely related to why they are one of the most valuable companies in the world. To understand Microsoft's fatal flaw, we need to go back to where it all started. This is Microsoft's fatal flaw. Long before Albuquerque would become the home of Microsoft's first office, it would be the home to talented researchers and engineers wanting to help build the American infrastructure by making strong, reliable systems and products. Meanwhile, over in the Bay Area, a different tribe was forming, design-obsessed tastemakers who cared about how things felt. While both of these groups were interested in building things, they could not have been any more different than they were. You see, the people in the Bay Area are typically the ones that first discovers the great new band or decide what should be trendy to wear. These people are the first movers. The other types of people, the people you would typically find working in Albuquerque, would be the types of people you would put in charge of making an already existing organization run more efficiently. These are the people that are extremely good at using logic to spot issues, but you would never hire them to come up with the new biggest trend. It was therefore surprising that in 1974, a company from Albuquerque, Micro-Instrumentation and Telemetry Systems, MITS, would be the first company to create the first commercially successful personal computer. The Altair 8800 had no built-in screen or video output, but it still proved that computers could be affordable and accessible to individuals. And more importantly, it was the computer that would go on to change history forever, since this was the product that inspired Bill Gates and Paul Allen to start their company, Microsoft. Popular folklore tells us that Gates and Allen started the company after they saw the Altair 8800 in a computer magazine and realized that there was an opportunity to write an interpreter for the machine. After convincing the makers MITS to license the software, Microsoft was officially born. Already from the early days, one of Microsoft's defining characteristics would be clear. They never intended on making the most flashy products themselves, but they would intend on making the infrastructure that would make those products possible. You see, inside of a computer there are some flashy things like how the hardware looks, how the software looks, which programs it has, and how the software are designed and how well they run. And then there are some less flashy things, such as the compilers, interpreters, the operating system. And in modern computing, there are also plenty of data centers that your computer communicates with. All of these things are important for everything to work, but some of these things are more captivating than others. From the very first products Microsoft made, it was clear that they had a special ability to do a good job on the boring things. For example, MS-DOS was Microsoft's first big hit and allowed Microsoft to serve as the software platform that both other software makers and hardware makers could build on top of. But it would take them decades before they started selling the hardware products themselves. And once they started doing that, it was clear that they were founded not in San Francisco, but in Albuquerque. While Microsoft would later leave Albuquerque, it seems like Albuquerque never really left Microsoft. You see, while Microsoft would go on to become one of the most successful companies in the world, they did it in a very bizarre way. Other companies such as Apple would always spend hours talking about how perfectly designed their products were, how they feel, how they have thought about all the small things that you may never realize. Microsoft, on the other hand, has never paid much attention to design. Sure, they would always follow the trends of the times, but they would never be the trendsetters that a company like Apple always has been. In fact, the differences between the two otherwise similar companies were so obvious that it inspired Steve Jobs to deliver one of his most legendary quotes of all time, talking about Microsoft.
The only problem with Microsoft is they just have no taste. They have absolutely no taste, and what that means is, I don't mean that in a small way, I mean that in a big way, in the sense that they don't think of original ideas, and they don't bring much culture into their product.
When Steve Jobs talked about Microsoft not having any taste, there were plenty of examples to draw from, and even more examples have been added since then. When searching on YouTube, it is easy to find hundreds of videos mocking Microsoft for their many products that are outright bad. Some started out that way, while others became that way after they had been through the Microsoft machine. One good example of this is Skype. Way before Zoom, Discord or Google Meet, Skype was by far the most dominating video call platform. When Microsoft acquired Skype, they had more than 400 million users and cost them more than $8 billion, making it the most expensive acquisition they had ever made at the time. However, they managed to make the product completely irrelevant as they redesigned it and added plenty of integrations to Microsoft's other products, cluttering the interface. It was clear to anyone that Microsoft did not care about the Skype users. Instead, they wanted those users to sign up for Microsoft's other services. This meant that a few years later, when everyone suddenly needed to use video software every day, basically nobody chose Skype. Another example of Microsoft's complete lack of taste was on display when the CEO Steve Ballmer was asked about his initial reaction to the iPhone. To put it lightly, Ballmer was not afraid of the iPhone and instead thought that their Windows mobile platform would be the dominating operating system.
$500 fully subsidized with a plan? I said, that is the most expensive phone in the world, and it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard, which makes it not a very good email machine.
A few years later, they would have a funeral for the iPhone as part of the Windows Phone marketing campaign. Needless to say, this did not age well. While researching this video, I tried to find the consensus on what people thought were the worst Microsoft products of all time. There are several good contenders such as Bing, Zoom, Windows 8, Windows RT, Clippy, Internet Explorer, Bob. With so many great contenders, I could not decide what my least favorite Microsoft product was. So please let me know down in the comments what your opinion is. But with so many bad products, you may wonder, how did Microsoft even get to $1 trillion market cap to begin with? From the early days, Microsoft realized that if everyone used different operating systems, it would be a problem for everyone. Software developers would have to develop applications for different platforms, users would not be guaranteed that their favorite programs worked if they changed to a new machine, etc. In many ways, the most efficient state would be to have one operating system that everyone used, so that everything would be compatible with everything. And they realized that as soon as a standard operating system had been chosen by the industry, it would be almost impossible for anyone to switch away. So they decided to make MS-DOS not perfect, but good enough, and then spent all of their resources on convincing computer manufacturers to use MS-DOS as the default operating system. The strategy worked extremely well, and within a few years, Microsoft owned practically the entire OS market. As the computer industry grew, Microsoft automatically grew with it. This was an extremely important moment for Microsoft. The fact that they realized that if they became the standard, they would own almost the entire market was pure genius. And this is not something that any of the future Microsoft leaders would forget about. In fact, one could argue that the rest of Microsoft history is a reaction to this moment. For example, they did their best to convert their market share in one industry, operating systems, into an advantage in a different industry, business software. They made their own versions of popular tools such as word processors and spreadsheets, and made sure that they were extremely easy to install on Windows. The general consensus seems to be that the Microsoft Office programs were not necessarily better than the competitors, but they were more convenient to use since they integrated very well with the operating system. This decision would go on to make Microsoft many billions of dollars in the next decades to come. Microsoft knew that if they expanded the dominance in operating systems to dominance in software, they would be able to become the dominant player on the market and charge basically any price they wanted for their software. Similarly, for web browsers a few years later, Microsoft made sure that all versions of Windows came with their web browser Internet Explorer pre-installed. This quickly made it the most popular internet browser in the entire world. A little known fact is that Internet Explorer even used to be available on Mac OS. And when Apple resisted distributing Internet Explorer through the App Store, Microsoft threatened to stop supporting Microsoft Office in Mac OS, which would basically kill Mac OS, since the Microsoft products were so important at the time. This was Microsoft's bread and butter, being the default option and using that as power to influence how people use their computers. And being the default one place led directly to becoming the default in another place. However, it was not all butterflies and rainbows. As I'm sure you all know, what happened next was lawsuits claiming that Microsoft was acting like a monopoly. And later came a revolution in computing known as smartphones, a battle that Microsoft painfully lost. Unlike many other people, I owned a Windows phone and actually liked the quirky design, at least in the beginning. Over time, it became clear to me and many others that Microsoft had, well, a profound lack of taste.
I don't mean that in a small way, I mean that in a big way.
The apps had these very weird design choices, such as the huge headers, the lack of basically any colors, and weird navigation. When it became evident that this was not what consumers wanted, instead of admitting that they were wrong, they doubled down while they lost market share year after year. In the end, it was clear that Microsoft had missed a chance on the smartphone OS market. But this is not the only big battle that Microsoft lost, far from it. Microsoft tried to compete with Google's search engine by doing what they do best, taking advantage of being the default option. Specifically, Microsoft made Bing the default browser in Internet Explorer, but there were just two problems. First, Internet Explorer already sucked for a long time at that point, and even less techy people had learned how to download another browser and use that instead. This meant that relatively few people used Internet Explorer to begin with. And second, basically no one likes Bing more than Google, so over time people would either change the search engine to Google or switch to a different browser altogether. I can tell you one thing for sure, basically no one made the deliberate choice to use Bing. It was just something that you accidentally did if you had opened the wrong browser. And perhaps this is the big problem for Microsoft. As they achieved their dominance, it did not matter whether they made the best products, because people were almost forced into using them anyway. This idea has stuck with Microsoft for years, as they, for example, add annoying pop-ups and even buttons that require subscription to their OS. None of these decisions are about creating an amazing user experience, but rather converting one type of user into another type of user. But over time, as people learned that they did have a choice and that they could switch to something better, they did. And unfortunately for Microsoft, they gave users plenty of reasons to switch. Let's just look at Windows for example. Over the past few years, they have made the search experience worse by forcing you to use Bing, an option that you cannot disable by the way. And they even include ads in their OS to apps such as Candy Crush. It seems like Microsoft is again and again choosing a worse user experience because they are trying to squeeze money out of people. This is a slow process, but when going far enough back, it is clear what the tendency is. What you're looking at now is a graph of the worldwide desktop operating system market share. And while Windows is still by far the biggest, they remain unable to stop the bleeding to Apple and even to Linux. I use Arch by the way. Time and time again, Microsoft chose not to make the best product that people wanted to pick, but instead chose to lock in people so that they would be forced to pick Microsoft's product. But everything changed once Satya Nadella became CEO. Microsoft experienced a big shift once Satya Nadella became CEO. Just look at the stock price, which has increased more than 1200%. One of the first and most important things that Satya Nadella did was remove the so-called stack ranking system. This was a system they used where managers needed to rank their employees into 3 buckets: top, medium and bottom. The bottom employees would just get fired, while the others would keep their jobs. And even if a team were consisting of only extremely good people, the manager still had to put 20% in the top, 70% in the middle and the last 10% in the bottom, meaning that they would lose talented people a few times a year when it was time for stack ranking. This system was intended to make sure that only A players would stay, but in reality it meant that everyone was afraid of helping each other. Because if you help someone on your team and they get the credit for the work, you might look worse in comparison, and therefore be fired as a consequence. This means that when the employees were asking for help, they would decline or give bad advice to make sure that other people would not look better than them. Another consequence was that the employees did not want to join high-performance teams because they were afraid of looking worse in comparison. It would therefore be more strategic to work on less important projects with less experienced colleagues to increase your chances of keeping your job. In 2013, Nadella finally removed this broken system completely and replaced it with an increased focus on collaboration, feedback and learning. Many Microsoft employees have mentioned this as a huge change and finally allowed them to make mistakes by actually being innovative again. The fruits of this can be seen when Microsoft decided to finally do the good things again. They would, for example, make an amazing code editor called VS Code, and would be so good that for many years it has been the most popular code editor in the world. And what sets this product apart from many other Microsoft products is that they took a slow approach when they slowly but surely made the product better by actually listening to user feedback and not trying to squeeze people for their money. In order to earn back trust, they also acquired GitHub and made private repositories free for everyone. This is a big change for the developer community, and even 7 years after the acquisition, Microsoft have not made any big bad mistakes with GitHub. They have just made it a little better over time. They even invented GitHub Copilot, which was the first big AI product to really find product market fit, which later inspired countless of other companies to build on top of Microsoft's vision for how developers can use AI to be more productive. And the final example I want to bring up is Azure. After Satya Nadella became CEO, Azure has gone from around $1 billion a year in revenue to $75 billion. This is a dramatic change that shows how much Microsoft can do when they take their time and really home in on the good user experience. While Nadella managed to change Microsoft for the better, which both users and investors appreciate, Microsoft was recently sent into a panic state when AI became a thing. Despite being a big strategic partner and investor in the AI darling OpenAI, Microsoft has seemed like it was in a big existential crisis ever since ChatGPT exploded in 2022. It all started out with a big presentation where they would announce that Bing would now have an AI mode. While this might seem like a small change from the outside, it was nothing small to Microsoft. For years, Microsoft had jealously looked at Google's search engine business and had not been able to beat Google at their own game. With the partnership with OpenAI, it was finally possible to introduce a meaningful innovation that could make Bing stand out. Or, as Satya Nadella put it, make Google dance. While the tech world would closely follow this battle, it would quickly become clear that this new AI feature, despite Microsoft's best effort, would not be enough to sway people to choose Bing over Google. In fact, some people even said that the experience got worse. The AI would make up things, misrepresent the content from the search results, or just straight up be weird. Microsoft publicly addressed these comments, saying that the technology was still new and that these issues would be resolved over time. In the meantime, they would continue to roll out AI features like there was no tomorrow. In a matter of months, they rolled out AI features too: Word, PowerPoint, Excel, Outlook, Windows, and even Paint, just to mention the most significant products. As Microsoft continued to roll out more and more AI products, the sentiment on the internet would slowly change. While AI was mostly impressing people in the beginning, many people started to question if all products really needed an AI mode or sidebar. The fact that Microsoft blindly rolled out AI everywhere made it feel less like the Microsoft we had known under Satya Nadella and more like the Microsoft under Stephen Ballmer, which would release plenty of products without really considering if they were good or not. In fact, you could argue that Microsoft were doing this in a way that suggested that they didn't have any taste.
And what that means is, I don't mean that in a small way, I mean that in a big way.
To people who are barely thinking about technology and business, it seemed like Microsoft got scared that they would miss another technological platform switch, just like they missed mobile. And in order to prevent this, they want to make sure that they are 100% invested in AI. If they manage to get into the AI era in a leading position, it could become another way for them to use a default position to gain power in other areas. This can be seen in how they, despite the big investment in OpenAI, also are developing their own models, which they hope to one day compete with OpenAI. And they are not only trying to own the model layer, but also the product layer, which is why they are adding AI to everything to see what sticks. Satya Nadella has mentioned in an interview that he's haunted by the idea of Microsoft becoming obsolete by the AI wave. Apparently, even giants get scared when they realize that the world might not need them anymore. While this explains why Microsoft is suddenly choosing this new strategy, it does not make the strategy good. You see, if we have learned anything from Satya Nadella, it is that Microsoft is able to make good products if they take their time. But when they rush into products or try to force people to use their products by being the default, they always end up messing things up. Yet, in the AI era, they are choosing to do the exact opposite of what have worked for them in the past. They are rushing out products that few people seem to like, they are abandoning all taste, and people are publicly complaining about it. But they keep pushing on with this strategy because they are so afraid to be left behind and lose another platform battle. Another thing that we have learned from Microsoft's history is that they are really good at making the boring things. In the AI era, this means being good at doing cloud computing that model providers can use to actually run the computers. And objectively, Microsoft is killing it with Azure. The business is booming, has great projected growth, and the customers are overall really happy. But despite this, Microsoft is acting like they are a San Francisco company, which makes the fancy things that people see. If you ask me, Microsoft should act like the Albuquerque company that they have always been. But that is just my humble opinion. If you like this video, please consider to like and subscribe and leave a comment down below regarding what you think of Microsoft's new strategy. Thank you, bye.